Good evening. Welcome to another Little Adventure Time Tales. We've got 3 cycle tours tonight that we're going to be thinking about. So first is one of me on my own, the Wales Divide, concocted, designed by me, nothing official. And the second one is the tour that I did with Iona this year. And the third one was the big tour of the summer for Ewan and I when we headed to the Netherlands and did the Zuiderzee. So, hence the title of tonight, Zuiderzee and Lyme. Iona's tour was featured Lyme as a place to visit, and Zuiderzee was the tour we did in the Netherlands. So, that's where we're going to be going. And I put this up every time because the reason we love cycle touring as a family is very much because you go fast enough to get somewhere but slow enough to enjoy the journey. And to me, that is what it's all about. That is why we love it. And we've been sharing, Iona's had the chance to do a radio interview with BBC WM and CWR. This afternoon, she's being interviewed for The Week magazine, junior version of, to go out at the beginning of next year. And both of those have had that opportunity to talk about what cycling means and how you can sort of enjoy it and how she can inspire, hopefully, other youngsters to get involved. So these are some of the cycle tours. For those of you I've added to the list, new one on there now for 2024. This is what Ewan's done over the last few years on our cycle tours. This is what Iona's been up to as well over the last few years. But this time, I treated myself to a cycle tour at the start of the sort of summer, June the 30th, my birthday. I gave myself a birthday treat, which was to basically abandon the family and go off and cycle across Wales. So, a few stats: 196 miles of cycling, 11,575 feet of climbing. You know when you plot a sort of elevation plot on Komoot, and you go, oh yeah, there's 3 big hills there. I always forget is, of course, when you've got a sort of route of 200 miles, it compresses and hides all the little bumps in between the big hills. I'm convinced I was never cycling on the flat for the entire ride. It was probably the toughest ride I've done. It took me 4 days, including travel, and there was, of course, because it was over a weekend, a parkrun involved as well. So this was the route that I designed. My idea was to stay within Wales and to cycle from the northernmost mainland point to the southernmost main point on the mainland. So we started here. So just a little video to set the scene. So that's the first part of the ride. So started out in Prestatyn, and we headed to, I'm going to pronounce this right, Talaka Beach, which is where the lighthouse was. It's the most northerly point in mainland. Obviously, if you go over to Anglesey, you can go slightly further north, but that was the most northerly point where we were. And started out, as was rightly said, it was relatively flat for the first bit because I was cycling along the coast. And then you head on an old cycle lane, an old railway lane which has been converted into a cycle route out of Prestatyn, which was nice. Having said that, it was nice as a cyclist. I reckon whatever steam trains or whatever used to pull trains up there must have worked hard, because it was definitely not an easy gradient as far as steam trains were concerned. Managed to grab myself some fish and chips in Prestatyn and sit there in the evening, eating those before carrying on. And the seagulls were very interested, but were left disappointed. And it was just one of those beautiful evenings, the golden light, beautiful evening. And so I was heading towards Ruthin because I knew there was a parkrun there that I could do. And I, just outside of Ruthin, well, as I went through Ruthin, I first of all heard bagpipes, which was a slightly odd experience, playing in the pub, in the rugby club car park for some reason. And then as I got just out to Ruthin, I found some forestry and what I think was probably sort of one of these forest schools. And they'd built some of those sort of tent-shaped shelters out of wood. So I just thought, that will do. I don't even need to put the tent up. I can just use one of those with my bivvy bag and sleep under that for the night, which I did. It was dry and nice when I went to bed. It did rain a bit during the night, but actually the shelter that the kids had built worked very well. So the following day, having done the parkrun, it was time to start heading up some hills. And so we had the climb, I cycled through to Bala, and then out of Bala you've got Cumhirnu, I think it's pronounced, but basically a very long hill, which then you drop down from that to Lake Vyrnwy. So big uphill, big downhill. At the top of that, as I got to the top and was having, I think, a well-earned breather, two guys came up on mountain bikes, saw the amount of panniers and stuff I've got on my bike, realised that mine wasn't an e-bike and their two mountain bikes were, and questioned my sanity. I probably was questioning mine at that point as well. Carrying on from there, and I got through to the next town and was sort of thinking, where am I going to wild camp tonight? What are the opportunities to camp? And then just sort of went on Google Maps and said, oh, there's a campsite at a pub right on the route that I'm going to be going on. That sounds perfect. Because it was my birthday the next day. I thought, pub meal, camping, sounds great. I got to the campsite, the pub, slightly scared because they've got a sign on the wall which said cash only, and I don't carry cash, basically. And thinking, oh no, but I said, look, can I pay by bank transfer on my phone? Yeah, that's fine. So paid by bank transfer, £5 to camp there for the night. Absolute bargain. So a great find that was. So really enjoyed that evening, sitting there with a pint, with a very nice meal that they cooked for me. They kept the kitchen open just to feed me because it wasn't exactly early by the time I got there, and thoroughly enjoyed just relaxing there, and even was able to have a shower therefore, which, if you'll know anybody from bikepacking, is an unheard of luxury. So yes, the next day was woken by a cockcrow at the campsite. And taken a few birthday cards with me. My sister lives in Tanzania, so I thought the longest travelled birthday card with me to open on my long tour. I thought that was a good sort of combination. And most of the day, my only company was cows and sheep. It was a Sunday, which meant everything was pretty much shut, and it was just very quiet. But the good thing was the first couple of days riding, you know, I was hoping for the sort of Welsh views, and actually spent a lot of my time with hedges towering several metres above me and couldn't see a thing other than a hill in front of me. So it was really nice on this day to actually get some of the views and appreciate some of the views of the Brecon Beacons and so on later on in the day. I was starting to get hungry, and this place appeared and was opened. It was a bit of an oasis in a desert as far as I was concerned. At this point, I was just about to join another old railway line to take me into the last bit towards the Brecon Beacons. And this cafe, obviously the old station, superb cafe, delicious cake, some sort of sausagey thing that I had for the main coursey bit as well, and a whole craft centre-y thing and so on there. I wasn't buying anything like that because that would be more weight to add to my panniers. So that night I stayed with actually a friend who I was at primary school with. She now lives in the Brecon Beacons, but she is actually probably part of the reason that I'm into cycling. My parents are one reason, they got me into cycling. But she was, we were both members of Kenilworth Wheelers in our teens and used to do time trials and everything with Kenilworth Wheelers. So she was very much my training partner all the way through secondary school, got into various escapades. We had general studies lessons on a Thursday afternoon. It wasn't entirely essential that you went to those lessons. So sometimes going for a long cycle ride was preferable in a sixth form to spending time in general studies lessons. Children don't listen to that. But views, I did a little bit of flat along the canal, and then I was climbing on the Taff Trail again. So you start off by climbing up from where I was, up, over, and then drop on the Taff Trail all the way to Cardiff. And it was one of those, it was never super steep, but it was just, you know, bottom gear, grind all the way up it. Amazing views. The one problem with the Tour de Fur bike, it's still the original spec gears on there. They obviously designed it for people who weren't carrying the load. I'm very impressed by the amount you managed to carry. I think mine is about 3 times as heavy as the kit that you had on. And I feel every gram of it going up some of those climbs. So then we started to descend, and, you know, great. The Taff Trail, the other side of that, is this amazing, most of it tarmac, traffic-free route all the way down, basically most of the way to Cardiff. It was all going fine until I got to Pontypridd, which has obviously been in the news recently. It was flooded in the bad floods they had a couple of weeks ago. And I was going through the park there. First of all, I couldn't get through the park very easily because they'd got the Eisteddfod, Welsh Eisteddfod, which is a big music festival, coming there a couple of weeks after I was going through. So they were setting up. Finally found my way through the park, going out on the trail the other side, and came across these gates, which were locked. And there were fences all the way up either side. There was nowhere to go. So I had to go all the way back to the park keeper's office. They then got on the radio to somebody. I then had to follow them in their van all the way back to there to let me through. Which resulted at that point in a slight change of plan. There was no way timing-wise now I was going to be able to get to the southerlymost point down by sort of to the west of Cardiff. But I wasn't going to be able to then get back to Cardiff and catch a train which would get me home at a sensible time. So I did a bit of rapid replanning, decided, right, I'm just going to stick on the Taff Trail and take myself all the way to Cardiff on the Taff Trail. And so instead of finishing where I was originally going to plan, I finished in Cardiff Bay, which for me actually was quite nice anyway. I'm a massive Martin Joseph fan, who's a singer-songwriter who lives in that area of Wales. He's written a song about Cardiff Bay. So actually it's quite a nice way to finish the ride and a beautiful setting to do so. I was very impressed with Cardiff as well in terms of cycle infrastructure. They've got some really good cycle infrastructure there as well. So that was my little birthday treat to myself. I really enjoyed just doing that sort of big trek, getting across Wales and just experiencing some of what it had to offer. But I did find out that Wales was hillier than I thought it was. I knew it had big hills. I didn't realise how many little hills it had the entire journey. So the other smaller cycle tour that I did over the summer was with Iona. And this was one of these ones where we basically, Iona at the point that we left home didn't have a clue where we were going. So as far as Iona was concerned, it was a mystery tour. And it was about a 60% mystery tour for me as well. We were going to do 74 miles in the end, about 2,450 feet of climbing. We took 4 days over it, including one parkrun, of course, and the parkrun day was largely a rest day for it. So this was the route that we ended up doing. Basically, I only knew where our start was about 3 days beforehand. I'd looked basically on train prices and found the cheapest train tickets I could find, which would get us somewhere to start a ride from. Found I could get a really cheap deal to Manchester that particular morning. And I'd found there was a parkrun at Lyme. So I thought, right, we'll go and do the parkrun at Lyme. And that was literally, at the point we were on the train, about as far as my planning had gone. So if you're the sort of person who likes to know all the details, you're probably not best off coming on a cycle tour with me. But here you go. Here's a little taster of what went on. So there you go, our little cycle tour. So as ever, started with the trains. We try very much to keep the whole thing as low carbon as possible. So hence trains and sort of that style of travel. Plus I love trains because you can get to start somewhere and then just end up somewhere else. You don't have to worry about a circle. You can just sort of do what you want fundamentally. The interesting thing about the trains though was that was part of what led to the serendipity, shall we say, of our journey. So headed out to Manchester, again, reasonably good infrastructure in Manchester, some really good bits and some not so good bits. And then we headed onto the Middlewood Greenway, which took us to what ended up being a night's camping in a campsite. At the point when we first got on the train, I had warned Iona that I hadn't booked a campsite and I had no idea if there was a campsite anywhere near where we were intending to do the parkrun the following day, and therefore she might be experiencing her first ever wild camp, which she was slightly nervous about. But I did some Googling on the train and discovered a campsite which was a sort of not general public campsite, but they allowed people to camp there if you happened to get in touch with them. It seemed a very informal type. A lot of the people on there had got permanent caravans or a booked pitch there. So everybody else seemed to know each other. But it was perfect for us, right by the canal, delightful little spot to stop. Having had tea with our ubiquitous Aldi tortellini, which, to be honest, by the end of the summer, I had enough of Aldi tortellino. It is a great meal for cycle touring. It is dirt cheap. It's a lot cheaper than these pre-packaged things you can get from Go Outdoors and so on. And the children eat it, unlike those ones from Go Outdoors, which they've told me never ever to buy again for them to eat. But they only do 4 flavours and they're basically the same thing with different bits inside. And by the end of the summer, having done my tour, Iona's tour and Ewan's tour, I was slightly sick of it. But we treated ourselves, we thought, to a dessert at the pub just down the road from the campsite. Cookie dough was the advertised thing. I don't think I've had a harder, crunchier cookie ever. And since cookie dough is supposed to be lovely and soft and chewy, it definitely failed to deliver, didn't it, Iona? But the glass of red wine I had with it was quite nice. So the following day, we headed to Lyme Park itself, which was an interesting challenge. You saw me pushing bicycles up a very rough track on part of that video. It was literally from our campsite up to Lyme Park, 3 miles uphill. But the National Trust property itself is absolutely beautiful, and they do a parkrun there. Amazing parkrun, trail parkrun, beautiful views over the sort of hills that there are around about there. And you go up to this place, which is called the cage, which is even worse when you hear what it was actually for. It was for the ladies to stay at while the men were out hunting. So the ladies could stay there and watch the sort of men hunting on the parkland roundabout, prepare food, picnics. Well, they wouldn't have done the preparation, and enjoy food and picnics at the cage. So I'm not entirely sure what you think about putting ladies in a cage, which is basically what they were doing. It's a slightly strange concept, but I only enjoyed the parkrun, and then we spent some time, we are National Trust members, exploring Lyme Park itself. Great experience, got to dress up, and there were some families, the whole family dressed up. I wasn't brave enough for that. And we're actually, you're allowed to stay in the clothes and wander around the property dressed in all your finery. If you get the chance, it's a beautiful gardens and house to enjoy. So definitely recommend that if you get the chance. And I see, there we go. And then we headed back to the campsite, nicely downhill on the way back, and just enjoyed one of those, again, those beautiful golden evenings. Just went for a little walk along the canal. We didn't decide to go for a dessert at the pub again this time. Breaking our teeth once was enough. And yeah, I was getting very trigger happy with my camera that evening. So the following day, we joined onto the canal, and we were cycling over on the Macclesfield Canal, heading to Bollington Wharf, and Holly the Cafe boat, which is a cafe on a boat, logically enough, and they've got a YouTube channel. We've followed them for quite some time, their story on YouTube. This is actually the third time we'd visited them. So they actually recognise us now when we turn up, which I'm not quite sure what that says. But great coffee, great cakes. They've actually got a cookbook out, which we now have, and Ewan has been actually cooking some of their cakes, which has been very much enjoyed by the rest of us. The interesting thing is these bridges, which that particular canal is famous for. So you sort of walk, and it sort of does a spiral up onto the bridge and then a spiral back down. And the idea was the horses towing the boats could walk up, over and back down again without it sort of disconnecting or causing a problem. I'm not exactly sure how it worked, but interesting concept. But the fun bit is trying to get your bikes up and over some of those. They're all cobbled, quite rough cobbles, and it's quite steep. Trying to push your bike up was interesting at times. So at this point, we're carrying on down the canal, looking at the train times, because at that point we were planning to catch a train that evening back home. No trains, all bus replacement services. And of course, trains, you can take bikes on. Bus replacement service, you can't take bikes on. So going home that night was not going to be an option. So at that point, I then started looking for a campsite, and I found one, and it was only a short distance from the canal. What, of course, I didn't really check was the gradient from the canal to where the campsite was. It was the Castle View, which was probably an indicator, that was the name of the campsite, which was probably a bit of an indicator, a place called Mocop, and it was steep. And again, you saw me on the video, pushing both of our bikes up the hill. I think from the moment we left the canal to the moment we rode onto the campsite, we were climbing, and it was about 2 miles, was it, Iona? 3 miles?
Yeah, and it was all like that.
Yeah. But we camped the night. It was an interesting night. Our little tent was absolutely fine. There was one person with one of those roof box tents, and that roof box tent was not on the top of the car when we got there, because the wind was blowing quite strongly and actually blowing it off. So we were quite glad we got our little Vango tent. Next day, we did go up and visit Mocop Castle. It's National Trust, but it's just free to access. It's a ruin there, so anybody can go and visit it. Had a little explore of that, appreciated the views, and then enjoyed the downhill back down to the canal, and carried on along the canal, heading along the Trent and Mersey Canal, then onto the Scotia Valley Way and the Turnstile Greenway. They took us to the canal. One annoying feature of the canals was these gates, which Iona could happily squeeze through. My shoulders were too wide to actually go through the gate. So, they were designed that as an adult male, you had to do that to actually get through the gate. So on a bike, it was a nightmare. So that was that particular ride. We got back to Stafford, and at that point we then caught the train back home. We stopped at Stone for some lunch. We had actually been there, the two of us, on a previous cycle tour. We'd actually started from Crewe and we'd gone through Stone to Stafford on that one. And we were thinking, there was that great cafe where we had a great lunch, and we got to Stone to discover that cafe was no longer there, which was a slight disappointment. It was closed, that's right. And so we found another one called Bear, which, as you saw on there, we had some amazing pancakes stacked with bacon and maple syrup to enjoy. So that was our experience. The good thing about that whole experience, I jotted up every single penny we'd spent from the moment we left home till the moment we got back again. Every bit of food, everything, even down to the Greggs sausage roll that we enjoyed one mid-afternoon snack. And the whole lot came to under £170. So, the benefit of just, cycle touring and being careful about where you choose and what you do, you can get, a great little holiday without spending very much money at all. So that was the first sort of 2 mini tours of the summer. And what we're going to go on to next is the Zuiderzee route around the Netherlands. But I think that's an ideal opportunity to stop for a break. And what we've tried to bring is a bit of food from each of the countries represented by the tours. So you've got some Welsh cakes, mince pies were about the best we could do for English. I'm not sure whether they are English, but there you go. And stroopwafels from the Netherlands, if you've ever had those, absolutely delicious. So have a break for a moment and we'll enjoy some food. So yeah, just to start off, a few stats about the ride. What you will notice is ratio of miles to amount of climbing has changed considerably in this particular ride. And that climbing is, the mileage does include a little bit of mileage in the UK, getting us to the station and round London and from the to the ferry port. But the climbing is purely what we did in the Netherlands. There wasn't a lot of it. It was a much longer tour, so 12 days including travel. We did have a rest day in this particular tour as well, so a bit more, just a chance to recover at one point. So this was the first part of our ride. So we caught the ferry over to Hook of Holland, and the first couple of days were, first of all, just when we got off the ferry to go to Delft. And then we headed the next day up to Amsterdam after doing a parkrun. So that's the first sort of part of our ride. And here you go, have a little flavour. So we started off, as ever, train station, Tile Hill, heading down to London with our bikes. So we caught the train down to London, train from quick little ride across London to then catch the train up to Harwich, where we were going to catch the ferry from. Found a pub literally 3 miles from the ferry terminal who offered camping in their back garden, basically, for a £5. And you know, the big plus point of that is that meant there was a pub open that we could have a drink at, having got there, and just somewhere sort of warm and dry to sit for a little bit. And yeah, really good way of doing it. So if ever of you catching the ferry over from there and want to know where, Castle Inn, I would highly recommend. So it's £10 for the campsite, and it's only 3 miles downhill to the ferry. So that meant in the morning you hadn't got to worry about cycling up any hills to get to the ferry, which is so absolutely perfect for the start of the tour. I've looked at, Ewan had tried to say, couldn't we have a hotel that night? And he went, hotel 70 quid. Pub is 10 quid, pub wins. So then it was on to the ferry, and the difference, as a family, we went to the Netherlands last year. All 4 of us took our bikes, and last year we sailed from Hull, which is the overnight crossing. Amazing, really good fun in terms of live entertainment. It's a bit like being on a mini cruise overnight. But just for the 2 of us, it works out far less good value, because you'd have to pay for a cabin, basically the same cost for a cabin, whether there's 2 or 4 of you in there. So this time we went from Harwich, and also managed, the trains worked, and just everything seemed to work better from Harwich this time. So sailed over, and you're heading into the port at Hook of Holland. Amazing. We had a brilliantly smooth crossing, and it was just, beautiful day. Absolutely loved it. And the first night we stayed at Delft, which was actually the campsite we'd stayed at as a family before. So it was one of those things, first night, get there, know where we're going, know what it's going to be like. It's easy and comfortable. The difference, however, is this time I'd heard about, as bikepackers, basically campsites in the Netherlands won't turn you away and have normally an area set aside, which is also cheaper to camp in. So rather than some designated spots, they just have an area where if you've got a small tent. Last year we didn't really have a small tent, we had our family tent with us. Whole of the story trying to pack that. But this year, small tent, and most campsites across the Netherlands charged us somewhere between 15 and 25 euros for the night's camping for the 2 of us, as opposed to 30 to 40 euros last year when we were camping. So you definitely get quite a decent discount as a bike packer. But the other great thing about this was we didn't have to book our campsites in advance. So we could just see each day how we were getting on, whether we were feeling strong or whether we needed a bit of an easy day, and ride as far as we wanted to, because there was also no shortage of campsites. Most of the way round, there was a choice of campsites to go for. So first day, part of the reason we also headed to Delft was because last year when we were there, we'd gone to do a specific parkrun in the Hague, beginning with a Z, so we could get our Z parkrun. But we'd spotted, when we got to Delft last year, there was actually a parkrun literally 5 minutes from the campsite. So Ewan and I decided that this year we would go and do the parkrun right by the campsite. So we did that. I tell you what, they have a very different attitude to health and safety and general organisation compared to the parkruns here. Here, Coventry Parkrun has about 30 volunteers to make it happen on the day. Was it 4, Ewan, at Delft? They basically had the run director, the timekeeper, and sort of no marshals on the way around. It was just, off you go, run 5K, come back here. It was a very different experience. And then we headed up to Amsterdam. So the route that I showed you before, there was a couple of little detours, one of which was we felt we had to go to the airport and get ourselves a photograph in front of the I Amsterdam sign, which is obviously a bit of an iconic sign to do. And overall, you're just doing this whole ride, and the cycle infrastructure all around the airport everywhere, to have these segregated cycleways, signposted, all the rest of it, just makes for an amazing cycle touring, stress-free experience. So then we were got to Amsterdam, and this is what we were intending to do next, which is known as the Zuiderzee route, or otherwise known as IJsselmeer, which is the lake that you see there. So Zuiderzee, South Sea, is the blue line. So originally, that whole area encapsulated by the blue line that we rode was sea. And in 1932, they built the dike that you see at that top, that straight line across the top. And over the next period of time, they slowly drained out all the seawater, and the river, IJssel River, filled it up. It's now a freshwater lake. Plus, obviously, all of this area here is now what's called a ponder, where they've filled it in with land now. So half of the lake is now filled with land, and that was slowly drained and is now farmland, and we'll see a bit more of that in a moment. So, have a taster of the first part of our ride around the Zuiderzee. So a little flavour there of our ride around most of the Zuiderzee. So having got to Amsterdam and the campsite we stayed at before we started the ride, freshwater lake, but you can go paddling, and it's kind of got beachy type bits, so very nice to sort of cool off. In the evening, the campsites there, has to be said, most of them are much better than any campsite I've stayed at in the UK, and are cheaper than some of the, we stayed earlier this year in a campsite near, which cathedral was it? No, Abbey. Fountains Abbey, which was literally a field with a toilet in the corner and a cold shower. And we paid more for that a night than we paid for this campsite, which have got all of these facilities, including somewhere I could sit and charge up all my gadgets. The one problem of being a filmmaker and doing all of that stuff is you have a lot of batteries that need charging on a regular basis. So we carry a load of battery packs with us, but I'm very glad when I can hook up and get some power. Headed off, one of the key features of the Netherlands, bridges and various types of bridge that move to allow boats through. And then the other thing, of course, is yachts, boats. Very much, you could see there was some serious money sloshing around in that area, looking at some of the craft that was sailing on the Zuiderzee. Absolutely amazing. But that's one of the older ones, and the older ones have these interesting things at the side, which I've still not quite worked out exactly what purpose they achieve, but it was obviously a feature of them. Architecture-wise, I love some of the Dutch architecture. And of course, one of the things is that land is expensive. So buildings, even the old buildings, are quite high in a lot of places. But really quirky architecture to us, coming not from the Netherlands, and just lots of little tiny alleyways and all of that sort of thing to enjoy. But because we're following the Zuiderzee, the South Sea, though it's now all freshwater, of course, most of these places were built when it was the sea, and of course come from a fishing background, and all of that would have gone with that. And you can see a lot of that still in the architecture and the buildings that would have supported that. Also famous for cheese, quite a lot of that. I've got a picture of the cider there. One thing we discovered, there was only one type of cider that sold anywhere, it would appear, in the Netherlands. Everywhere we went, that was I do like a cold, in summer, I like a cold cider. That was it. No other choices. That was the one. Boats everywhere, some amazing craft. I like sailing yachts, motor yachts, all of that. So enjoyed watching all of that sort of thing as we were cycling round. So as you were cycling, what I loved as well was you just had this big open vista view as you were riding along. I think at this point, we'd got the wind behind us. So you just glided along with these amazing views. On the right there was a boat lift. So this was to take you from the Zuiderzee into the river or canal that went away from there. And rather than locks or whatever, it actually had a lift. So it just basically lifted the boat up out of the water, across, and dropped it down to go off in the canal. So we sat and watched that for a little bit as it was doing its process. And then this was, I think this would have been the Sunday. And just the whole world seemed to be just out on bikes, riding. Everybody, all ages, all types. You saw on the video, at one point you were being passed by two people all in their full lycra, matching, gear and all the rest of it. And then you've got families, you've got couples, everybody just out enjoying riding in mostly traffic-free routes with these views. Absolutely amazing to enjoy. You just go, oh, can't we have this back in the UK? Ice cream, of course, essential. And then this is the campsite we camped at that evening. Beautiful sunsets. We seemed to get most nights we were there. And of course, with the water there as well, you just have that big open skies. And the wind was quite strong at this point. So it actually looked like you were, actually at sea with the way that the waves were whipping up. And there was a tent again at that campsite below when I was with Iona, that in the morning it was one of those air beam tents, no poles. It has also got no shape by the following morning. As I said about the yachts, I dread to think how much that particular sailing yacht cost, but I like it. Wind generators, obviously everywhere, and I love that shot because you've just got a straight line of them, and it looked like you got sort of funny shapes. And if you're standing there watching it, and you're sort of seeing them move, appearing behind each other, it's quite mesmerising. So then we got out to where the dike is that separates the sea from the Zuiderzee. And obviously the other side of the dike, you've got the fishing boats. So there is a fishing port there, and they're obviously going out to sea from there. The plan had been, at this point, to be cycling across the dike. I hadn't done my research sufficiently beforehand to discover that they're currently rebuilding a cycle route across the dike. You can't cycle across it at the moment. That's what we found when we got to where the start of the cycle route was. But being the Netherlands, they hadn't just abandoned you. There is a cycle bus to take 20 bikes at a time across the dike and deposit you at the other side. So just turned up, waited, bus turned up, put your bike on, and off you went. So I must admit, it was quite nice to just sit on the bus and not be battling the wind across there. I think it would have been a headwind, certainly a slight across to headwind all the way across. So it would have been, and was it 20 miles? I think, to get across from one side to the other. So it was not going to be an easy ride. It was 10 minutes or so. No, it must have been less than 20. It must have been about 10 miles then.
I think you said 10 earlier.
10, yeah. So got to the other side and you're on your way. So you're not on segregated cycle routes all the time. You get a lot of this sort of roads which are, if you like, a bit like we have shared use between bikes and people. There they do shared use with bikes and cars. But chatting with somebody, what I'd not realised before was the law in the Netherlands is if you have a crash as a car driver with a bike, the presumed liability is the car driver. So unless there is a really obvious big error that's been made by the cyclist, you as the car driver are responsible for the safety of the bike cyclist round about you. And of course that shifts the way that car drivers behave around bikes. And we very much saw the evidence of that when we were riding along. So I got to the campsite that evening, and as I say, it used to be the sea, which means you've still got the beaches down there, but of course it's now fresh water. So we went for a swim, both of us, and you don't have that brackish taste that you get with seawater. It was nice and warm, and just a lovely way to relax at the end of a day's cycling. And some very nice drinks that they'd got at the campsite shop as well. Ewan's isn't alcoholic, I will point that out. And evening glow of the sunlight and Wi-Fi for me to hook up to. So I'm there working in the evening, catching up on emails and bits and pieces like that. So my laptop, part of the reason the weight of my panniers are probably quite a bit heavier than yours is, laptop goes with me everywhere as well. But then evenings like that, that's just one of about 20 photos I took that evening, and just loving that golden red light as the sun was setting was just beautiful. So, the next day, we discovered the 11 fountains. So friends of ours actually who were over in England for a year working and came to the church that we go to over in Lapworth. He said, if you're in that area, they're from the Netherlands. He says, if you're in that area, that's the area I grew up in. You must look out for the 11 fountains. The 11 fountains of Friesland. So each of the cities in Friesland, which is the north of the Zuiderzee, have one of these fountains which has been designed by an artist. And we found 3 of them in the cities that we were able to cycle through. They were all quirky, is an understatement. So these were lions sort of having a fight, and they were sort of spraying water at each other. That one was a natural earth one with the tree at the top right, and sort of fountains came out of the branches. And then there was this giant fish one. And they all represented something about the history of the city that they were within. So Ewan and I have had an idea for a future cycle tour, which is to go and cycle the 11 cities of Friesland and explore all of the fountains. We think that would be a good adventure to go on. So we just continued on our way, enjoying ice cream as we went. It was warm for most of the time we were there, so you have to have ice cream. And families cycling, so families doing the whole of the Zuiderzee route, and not my age group of children, but 4-year-olds. Some of them cycling some of the time, but then getting into trailers and all of that sort of thing. And you just saw that it wasn't just one or maybe two in the entire time. We probably saw 2 or 3 a day in that sort of setup of quite young children with a trailer doing the tour and just taking it as it comes as they went along. So that was really lovely to see. That evening, we ended up at probably the weirdest, most unusual campsite that I think I've ever stayed at. It was called the Nettle campsite. They actually hold a music festival there. You could tell, by the way, some of the tents were set up that people, because the Netherlands, they quite like their camping and they quite like long summer holidays. And so some of them were obviously set up to be camping there for the summer. So we were camped just there. Just round the corner from us was a MiG jet, because why wouldn't there be a MiG jet in the middle of a campsite? And then we went exploring in the evening. And you've got all these sculptures around the campsite, all lit up at night. It was quite a surreal experience. And then you've got the beaches as well. So they've got this whole sort of beach cafe resort thing set up on one of the beaches with the water there. So you could go swimming and have a drink or whatever at the bars there. I sat there catching up on some work, Wi-Fi again there, and sort of uploading some of the video footage, backing it up and so on. Just absolutely incredible place. It was the most expensive campsite we stayed at, but it was absolutely worth it to experience something I don't think I will ever quite experience at a campsite again. So headed off the next day, started off like that, and we ended up going like this. taste of the last part of our ride. So it started off now from that campsite, we were actually on some of the ponders. So these areas that have been reclaimed from the water. And what we kept seeing were these signs that either got a ship on the top or they got an aeroplane on the top. And they mark sites of wrecks of either ships or aeroplanes that they discovered when they were draining the area. So you see those, and the little QR code underneath you could scan, and it would then take you to a web page which gave you information about that particular shipwreck or aeroplane wreck. And they actually have a fund there. I think there was a programme by the motorcyclists, the sort of racing motorcyclists. Guy Martin, who because the government there have a fund for helping to recover particularly war aircraft from the water there as well. So this whole area, you can see on the right-hand side, was actually an island in the sea back when it was still all a sea. And that little thing on the right, man on the right there, he spun the wheel at the bottom and it played his story about what it was like living on the island, what it was like to be evacuated when the big floods came in, and sort of the story of the place at the time. It was just incredible to think that then after we left that island, you were cycling along what would have all been underwater less than 100 years ago. So, quite a weird experience. Talking of water, that was the day that we got wet. We're heading towards where we were thinking of camping that night, possibly going to go on a bit further. And as we got towards the town, we felt a few drops of rain. We went, oh, it's starting to rain. Within 20 metres, it had gone from, shall we put our waterproofs on, or to, where is the nearest cover, and actually a tree doesn't provide sufficient cover. Within minutes, Ewan and I were drenched. It literally, heavens opened. And I was trying to use my phone to find a campsite nearby. But of course, as you know, if you're trying to use a touch phone when your hands are wet and everything's wet, it can't really recognise your finger. So I was desperately trying to dry it off, use it. Managed to find a campsite just the other side of the little town. Got there, lovely lady, told us where it said, look, you can camp wherever you like because there's not going to be many people here tonight. And it was only a small site. And she said, there's that little gazebo thing. You can use that. There's lights in there, there's power in there, and you can cook in there and you can keep yourself dry. So rather than having to try and crouch in our tent, we could use that, hang stuff out a bit to try and dry out a bit, well, at least drip a bit. And you can tell we both look rather wet in that bottom right-hand picture, sat there watching the rain. We didn't go out anywhere that evening. So the following day, we got to explore the place. It's a place called Alberg. It's actually a medieval city. Of course, back again when it was a sea, it was very much a fishing-based economy. They realised when it started to get drained that they were going to have to change, and they targeted the tourist community. So it's still very untouched from being the medieval city that it was, and really nice to go and have a wander around. It's got walls, it's got a moat round it, all of that sort of thing. Lovely little place to go and explore, which we hadn't done the day before. We had actually got into the city, and as I was still trying to find the campsite, and spotted a cafe that was open, and parked our tents underneath a sort of canopy bit, parked our bikes underneath the canopy bit, dived into the cafe and realised that it probably wasn't the sort of cafe which would necessarily welcome dripping wet cyclists and so on, candles on the table, all of that sort of thing was probably, but they were perfectly pleasant, gave us both a hot drink, well, sold us a hot drink, and allowed us to shelter there for a little while, in the hope that the rain was going to ease. It didn't, so eventually we just gave up and carried on. Next day, carried on along the side of the lake again. So a few things here. These giant. There was 2 or 3 of these giant sculptures of bicycles, which were quite interesting. A giant flamingo. Part of the reason for that photograph is that I am known as the flamingo. I have a tendency to stand like this, particularly when I'm playing the flute, and so I had to take a picture of the pink flamingo. And the picture at the top right is my favourite lunch in the Netherlands. There seems to be something they do quite a bit of, which is this dark rye bread with goat's cheese on, honey and walnuts sort of crunched up on top of it. It is absolutely delicious. So I had that quite a few times as we were wandering around. And I know there's quite a few photos, but this sort of wide open space feeling was just lovely to cycle through, and the views across the lakes. But this day, 1 minute we'd be absolutely flying along, and the next minute we'd be struggling to do more than about 4 miles an hour. The wind was brutal on this particular day. And obviously there's nothing at all in the Netherlands to stop the wind. And so when you've got a headwind, you really got a headwind. So it may be flat in the Netherlands, but it's not necessarily easy cycling, as I'm sure some of you have experienced. So that day was, if you look at our pace on Strava, it was somewhat varied, purely down to which way we happened to be riding at the time. So we were heading back into Amsterdam at this point, and we actually headed back to the campsite that we'd started our ride at. We knew it was decent. That's the toilet block on the bottom right there. You know, don't get toilet blocks like that in the UK campsites. And just went out to, you saw probably on the video, Jumbo featured. Jumbo featured every single day in our experience in the Netherlands. We love Jumbo now. We wish that Jumbo would open. Their range of pastries and breads and their smoothies, absolutely amazing. Great value. That became our go-to place to get whatever food we wanted to eat that evening, or for lunch sometimes as well. So it was right by the river. Or canal, and so we headed there, got that, and just enjoyed the sunset, the Stoke there on the right, and then just headed back to the campsite. So the following day, we were heading back then from Amsterdam, so our aim was to get to another parkrun, because the next day was going to be a Saturday. So obviously that meant another parkrun. We came across this water tower on our way, Art Deco design. You can actually now get married in that water tower if you want to. It's open to the public. Campsite that evening, we had some extra visitors wandering around our tent, and another beautiful sunset that evening. So we then got another Z to add to our collection of parkrun alphabet challenge. The really weird thing was, got to the parkrun and somebody messaged me, had messaged me the night before saying, "Are you at?" I went, "Yeah. See you at parkrun in the morning." It was 2 people from my running club here in Coventry were also at that parkrun that particular morning. Neither of us knew that the other was going to be there, and ended up at the same parkrun that particular morning. So that was quite good fun. So we ended up spending some of the morning with them. We then went and enjoyed some very nice pancakes. The other thing that I highly recommend in the Netherlands, their pancakes are superb. Ewan wanted to go back to The Hague that we'd visited before, see the International Court of Justice that you see there on the left. Obviously famous for dealing with war crimes and all of that sort of thing. There's that international court. And on the right is the Parliament building in The Hague, which is the oldest Parliament building in the world. It dates back to the 11th century. So it's the oldest place that a parliament has been at over that continuously in that time. Headed back to Delft, to the campsite again that we knew. Ewan wanted to be able to enjoy having a splash around in the pool. It was perfect for it, and I just enjoyed some time. I love Delft, has to be said. I've fallen in love with the place a bit. It's not got the sort of the big grandness of Amsterdam, but it's got all of those little squares. I love pavement cafe culture, all of that sort of thing. So it just suits me, and it is an absolutely beautiful little place. It's also famous for the girl with the pearl earring painting. That's the artist, came from Delft. So we explored it a bit, a few things, obviously pavement cafe culture. One of the draws of that particular campsite is IKEA is 5 minutes walk away from the campsite, which has the benefit of A, cheap food for meals. We can go and get, the obligatory meatballs and so on from there. But also they've got plugs and free Wi-Fi. So I spent a little bit of time there charging devices and uploading the first of our videos to our YouTube channel while sitting in IKEA enjoying a coffee. I discovered a shop in Delft which I have never seen so much tat in one shop. I mean, the size of the shop, it was probably about the size of, Boots in Coventry. So one floor of Boots in the city centre of Coventry. So, we're not... And the entire thing was filled up with tat. Of every bit of type of tat, dressing up costumes, anything that you could imagine, they had it. It was bizarre and amazing at the same time. And then just you and I enjoyed a nice meal sitting in the square in Delft that evening. And just watching the world go by, enjoying a drink and a really tasty meal. Before we headed home and back onto the ferry, we had a short ride then from Delft to get to the ferry terminal, back on the ferry, and that sort of lunchtime-ish, and heading back to Harwich. Got back to Harwich, we of course then had to catch the train back to London and then back home. It was I was going to say very late night. It was a very early morning would be a better way of describing it by the time we actually got back to Coventry. You can see us docking the ferry there at the end of our journey. So yes, that was our experience of 3 different countries, 3 very different tours, great experiences. And I think just to me is everything that makes cycle touring great fun. If you want to find out more, the Netherlands video, the full video is yet to be edited and published. That will, he says, be going live over the Christmas holidays, so I've got some time free to get and finish editing that. But the video of Iona's tour and the video of my tour doing the Welsh Divide with commentary and everything on it are all live on the YouTube channel if you want to have a look at them. But any questions before I finish? Oh, and one thing to promise for next year, what's in store. We've been buying some new gadgets. So somebody spotted there is one drone shot in my Welsh video, but the problem with the drone I've got at the moment, it takes me about 5 minutes to get it set up before you can even start flying it. And then the batteries go flat in about 2 minutes. So we bought one of these new type of drones that literally take off from the palm of your hand and just will automatically follow you to get tracking shots at various heights. So expect a bit more drone footage for next year. And Iona's big plan is she would like to cycle from London to Paris. So I promised her, Ewan did a big tour this year. It's her turn to do a big adventure tour next year. So we are going to do London to Paris during the summer next year. Ewan and I are looking at doing a bit more of a mountain biking tour next year. So we're thinking of possibly the Marches one that's just been launched by Cycling UK, or if we're really adventurous, go for the Transaerei route if he's up to that. But we've got to get some new gear before that because you can't take pannier racks and panniers on those particular ones. So we need some different types of ways of storing stuff on our newly acquired mountain bikes.